The content of this episode may not be suitable for some audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky continued their discussion on mental health and what we can do to restore order, clarity, and freedom. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Jerry, thank you for joining us for another segment. I just want to jump right in and finish up on these patterns of these energetic entities that you have found in schizophrenic patients. And as we discussed last week, it's not just in people that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but some of these patterns that you've observed, I know for an absolute fact, have afflicted so many people I know, have afflicted me. I'm seeing them mentioned in increased number by the people that attend our rest seminars and our rest retreats. You're really speaking to something that sends chills up and down my spine, because these patterns and these intrusive voices are things that are becoming very common to people. So thank you for joining me again.
And what's this? These patterns aren't like, a biochemical imbalance or genetic thing. I mean, you can go to my website, you can pull up this list of patterns, and you can see them for yourself. They're right in front of your eyes. All you have to do is look. Anybody who's got a schizophrenic child or schizophrenic husband or works with schizophrenics can pull this list of patterns up, and they can see these for themselves. It's not like hidden up in some genetics or some mysterious biochemical imbalance things.
Or in some academic journal or in some psychiatric manual.
Right. Now, if these voices can be gotten rid of by any means at all, paranoid schizophrenia, all the symptoms will vanish. They will be gone. I've seen it over and over and over again. There's other ways to treat schizophrenics beside with drugs. Now, like I said, drugs have their place. There's a lot of schizophrenics I would never have been able to reach if they weren't calmed down with those drugs. I wouldn't have been able to touch them. But those drugs are not a permanent, they don't cure anything. They shouldn't be used for a long period of time because they're destructive. They rot out the central and peripheral nervous system. They cause permanent irreversible damage with long-term use. Of course, they won't tell you that.
So antidepressants and antipsychotic medications cause damage to the nervous system? Or is it one or the other?
It was more the antipsychotics.
Okay. What are examples of antipsychotic medications?
Oh, Geodone, Thorazine, Mellaril, Risperidol. Seroquel. These are all major tranquilizers, they call them. And that's why they work, because they tranquilize the person. They turn them into a semi-zombie. It's like drinking too much. You might cut your arm or break a bone, but you don't care about it because you're so drunk. They don't cure anything. They don't get to the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is the voices. It's the voices that drives paranoid schizophrenia. And if you got, the psychiatric mafia brainwashing the population into believing that the voices, they're hallucinations, they're figments of your imagination, they're not real, then you cut off you cut off the route to a solution.
Yep. Even if you're a well-intentioned psychiatrist and you're listening to this, or your husband is, or your brother or your sister are in the mental health field, and you are taking offense to some of the things Jerry is saying, I just want to invite you to be curious, perhaps. Again, put your thoughts on the margin as you're hearing our conversation. as you're listening to our conversation and say, wow, maybe I need to start asking some different questions and not just accept what I'm being told to believe in spite of what I'm seeing, in spite of how my conscience is informing me to perhaps question some things. I hope Jerry is causing all of us to question a lot of things. Jerry, number 20 of the patterns is they love boredom. If you're hearing voices, this is the worst thing you can do because there is a spiritual battle for your attention.
Yes.
They want to control your attention.
Yes. They will not be ignored. So the worst thing that you could do with a schizophrenic is let them get bored. Let them lock themselves in the bedroom and play with their, watch their awful movies or play their violent video games. That's making them worse. And the voices want that. So the voices will cause so much trouble with the family. The constant uproar, the constant insults, the constant crazy making, that the family finally goes, okay, let him get in his room and lock the door and stay there. We don't want to deal with him. We'll just get a few hours of just peace and quiet. Because they cause all kinds of consternation and anger, and they affect people in very negative ways.
And I think the family, the relatives, the employers, the people in their sphere of influence become so exasperated that sometimes it's better to avoid the reality of what they're dealing with just for moments of peace.
Yeah, but like you said, it's a battle for their attention. Either they take control of their attention and focus it on something good, maybe some positive video games or church schools or reading or something positive. The voices hate humor. They don't want the person to be happy. Watch America's Funniest Videos or watch some uplifting programs. Don't allow them to go in their room and seal themselves off and play these violent video games and speak to their voices and argue with their voices. That's the worst thing you could do. They want that person isolated because then they have control and there's no interference.
And sometimes I would add, they're not even violent video games anymore. It's the addiction with technology, with online games, online word things, online. People are completely disengaged consciously disengaged from each other. I think that's becoming a problem as well, because there's online chess or games, all kinds of different things, solitaires and whatever. It's like, oh no, I'm exercising my mind. I'm just relaxing. No, you're not. You're completely disengaged from yourself, from others, from what you should be doing with that time. And before you know it, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours have evaporated.
Right. You look what they did in the pandemic. Oh, don't get near each other, 6 feet away. Don't visit relatives on holidays. Don't go anywhere. Don't go to stores. Don't, stay away from everybody. Stay isolated.
And it defied reason.
Yes. Totally defied reason.
Because everything your body needs to heal is in the outdoors, is in the context of relationships.
Right.
Isn't. Yep. They didn't want us talking to one
another. They were trying to destroy all relationships.
By the way, $70 billion, last figure I heard, I'm sure it's far surpassed that, in lawsuits that are already flying around from how the government mitigated that. So the lawsuits and the loss.
Yeah. So who's going to pay that money for the lawsuits? We are. You don't think Fauci's not going to put a penny out of his pocket? The government is going to pay it, and they're going to tax us for the money. So it's no skin off their back. Nobody's going to jail.
The largest transfer of wealth in history took place those few years. Number 22, they tried to cast themselves off as your thoughts. You touched on that in the last segment. They come from another dimension. They're energetic parasites. They want your energy. They're dangerous. Which I guess goes right back to why you can't be disengaged from all your senses.
No, you got to keep an eye on your thoughts and what's running through your head, because your brain is like a radio receiver. Those thoughts aren't generated in your mind. They come from outside, and they're based on your frequency. So if you're a very spiritual person, you're going to hear more positive stuff. If you're a negative person, you're going to hear more negative stuff. So it's like you tune into the frequency, and what lowers the frequency, especially for schizophrenics, is the horrendous abuse and trauma that most of them face when they're younger, sometime in their growth. I mean, it's that trauma that brings down their frequency. And with the clients I deal with, one of the most common things they report is that I'm worthless. I'm no good. I'm worthless. This incident happened, and I made a decision based on this incident that I was worthless. And then they go on living their lives from that time on as if they were worthless. And it poisons their whole life. And a lot of the times, these things are behind the traumas that people experience also.
So good, because there is a connection between these intrusive voices and early childhood trauma. And that doesn't mean you're not experiencing measures of success and you haven't developed coping skills and maladaptive, often coping skills. And for all intended purposes, you have an okay life. That's not what determines your measure of freedom. What determines your measure of freedom is how these intrusive voices afflict you. Because sometimes these patterns show up in really successful people that are very productive.
Yes.
And they have money, but they're personally tormented. And we see that show up in addictions and all kinds of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Number 22, you said they affect selective forgetting. 23, they fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves and others. You mentioned that last segment. 24, they destroy any vestige of positive self-concept. 25, they attempt to pull their victims away from any consensual reality. That's powerful.
Yeah, they try to pull them into their version of reality, their hellish world of lies and deception. They warp and distort perception.
They use confusion as means of instilling negative suggestions.
Yeah, because when you're confused, you're looking for, it's an uncomfortable state. You're looking for a way out of it. And so they create the confusion, and then they give you a direction. And that direction is usually a bad one.
That is so good, because when we're in a state of confusion, we're desperate.
That's the same thing hypnotists do. And I noticed a lot of these people feel hypnotized. I remember one guy who the voices told him to kill himself. They said, take your pistol, get in your car, drive out in the desert, and when you run out of gas, take your pistol, go sit down and shoot yourself. So he did that. He took his car, ran out of gas in the middle of the desert, took his pistol, was walking out into the desert. He sat down, he cocked a pistol, he was about to shoot himself, and this bird flew in. And he said it was a bird like he'd never seen before, and he was raised in the desert. He said, I'd never saw a bird like that before. He said that bird started screaming at him, just screaming at him. So he took the gun, and he fired the gun at the bird, and the shot going off woke him up. So he's standing there with the gun in his hand, and he's going, my God, what was I going to do? So
Wow.
he was like in a trance. And that's what they do. They put these people in a trance. And you see this stuff with these multiple shootings where these guys go out and they're psychotic and they shoot a bunch of people.
Wow. They are averse to anything positive and beautiful.
Yep.
They do not want to be discovered.
Yes. They don't want the person telling anybody about them, that they're there. And they will actually punish the victim in a lot of cases if they do tell somebody. And they'll tell them. They'll out and out tell them. You tell anybody about us, nobody will believe you. They'll think you're crazy. They will take you to a psychiatrist, and then they'll lock you in a hospital. And unfortunately, that's what happens most of the time.
This one just got to me, your bonus one. They don't want people to sleep because
Yes.
if they stay awake, they're weaker. They
Yes,
can't concentrate. Sleep disorders are absolutely crippling. They're crippling our generation.
Yeah, they strike hardest between 2 and 3 in the morning. So most schizophrenics say, oh, I wake up at 2 in the morning and the voices are screaming at me. And then they keep them up the rest of the night. So the more sleep deprived they can make them, the less resistance that the patient will pose to them. Because virtually all of them feel something is wrong, something is taking them over. They don't know what it is. It sounds like it's their own mind. And that's what psychiatry is telling them. Oh, your mind is broken. It's not something from outside of you. It's you. You are broken. Your mind is broken. So what are you supposed to do about that? And psychiatrists said, well, you take our toxic drugs. That's what you do about that. They have to understand that this is an enemy. This is an independent enemy that is not coming from them. It's not a part of them. It's coming from the outside. As long as they feel it's them, there's nothing they're going to be able to do about it. I had one patient write me and he goes, thank you so much. Once I found out it wasn't me, that these voices weren't me, I can handle it from here. That's all he wrote.
I love that. And that's what I was going to ask you to go back to. Thank you for sharing that one. I was going to say there's a few that I want you to comment on. They're consummate liars. And the lying is that they accuse. Accusers. They're accusers. They come to kill, steal, and destroy. That's it. Like parasites.
Yep. All they're interested in is the negative energy that those lies generate.
How do they manipulate feelings without speaking?
I have no idea how that happens, but I've had it happen to me a few times. And I've talked to schizophrenics and they've felt it too. Like you're sitting around, everything's going good, minding your own business, and all of a sudden you start feeling bad out of nowhere. There's no cause. It's just like you just get this heavy feeling that comes over you for no reason. I've had that reported a number of times by these people.
I've experienced it as well. So I concur.
See, so when I realized it was them, and I'm like, get out, get out.
No.
And then it would vanish.
It's so true. When we can understand that something is accusing, assaulting, manipulating, and their presence is intrusive, it is a thing. How about this? You feel hope right away.
Right. And it's not you.
Exactly.
That's so important that if a schizophrenic's going to recover, he has to understand that those voices are not him. They're not coming from him. They don't belong to him. They're separate from him. They're an enemy. And he has to fight back against them.
You said they short-circuit reason. Is your way of mitigating these intrusive voices that afflict schizophrenic, and we see that in increasing numbers, they're afflicting us as well for some reason? Some portal somewhere has been open to the reality that this isn't just schizophrenics. We're experiencing the reality of what a schizophrenic has been trying to communicate to us. And thank God you rose up after being 40 years in that field. But what function does reason have? Is that one of the stepping stones out of this kind of insanity that you help them reason?
Well, it can be. And I know two people I bring on with me who have reasoned their way out of this thing. So it's interesting to expose them to the public. And they would challenge the voices and go, that doesn't make any sense. And on my website, you can go to we have dozens of videos there. You can go to the videos on YouTube or Rumble or Odyssey, or go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, and all the videos are there. And go watch the one from Anonymous. He got through this by reasoning his way through and eventually defeated the voices that way. But one way to kind of help, if you want to understand what these things are, you can read this book by Sherry Sweeney and myself. It talks about how we came.
Can you tell us the name of the book?
It's an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower. Now, Sherry, when she was younger, she was hearing voices also. And when I was investigating this, it was getting more and more bizarre, and there was nobody sane that I could talk to about this. What I was finding and what these voices were doing and what they were saying and how they were reacting. And then it got to the point where they were getting terrifying. I mean, I did not want to believe in demons. I thought this was some figment of the subconscious. Something was broken. I didn't want to believe in demons. And the evidence was just growing and growing and growing and growing. And I still was in denial of it. I didn't want to see it. These patterns kept coming up and coming up and coming up. And then I got in trouble for asking patients in the psychiatric hospital about the voices. I was told by a psychiatrist, you will stop asking these questions. By asking the schizophrenics what the voices are and what they do, you're reinforcing them and you're making the patient worse. And I was ordered to stop. That happened twice. When I got a job in the psychology department of the state prison, it was wide open for exploration. I mean, if a schizophrenic went to the warden and said, oh, this guy's asking me questions about the voices I don't like and he's upsetting me, it would be nothing. He'd go get out of here, go play in the traffic. It wouldn't even foster a second thought. So what I did is I had a group of schizophrenic prisoners around me that I had a deal with, that if they would tell me what their voices were telling them in real time while we were in therapy sessions, I would do everything I could to help them. And we would explore this together, because a lot of them were just as curious about what the voices were as I was.
Exactly.
They didn't know what they were either. They could hear them, they could feel them. They didn't know what they were. So what I started doing after a while is like, what would happen if I started tripping up these patterns? What if I started giving them assignments that would interfere with these patterns? And it wasn't long before they started reporting back saying, the voices are becoming very angry at you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't want me to come here. They don't want me to keep these appointments. They were ragging me all the way here from where I came from.
Yeah.
They don't like it. So that was the first kind of thing. I'm like, well, that's odd. A hallucination doesn't like what I'm doing. So then the next one that came up was
that's
one
not
guy.
Possible.
Well, according to the psychiatric mafia, it is. So the next one, the guy came in and he goes, after we finished the session, he stops in the door and he looks at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I didn't think it was. I'm like, okay, they're stuck in your head. They're not stuck in my head. You know, I don't think they can get out of there. I think I'm safe. But it's stuck in my head, just like that thing where in undergraduate school where the professor said, oh, two schizophrenics who meet each other with the same delusion have to, it's stuck in my head until I had a chance to do it. So he turns around in the doorway. He says, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I look at him, he looks at me, and then he turns around and walks away. And I'm like, I wonder what that's all about. So the next thing that happened with him, I think it was the same guy. He comes in without a pass. He gets into the medical unit somehow without a pass. I don't know how he did that. Knocks on my door, and I open it, and he says, the voices want to talk to you. I said, they want to talk to me personally? He said, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. That had never happened before. In like 2 decades, that had never happened. It was always the patient would tell me what the voices were saying, you know, and they would usually saying stuff like, oh, you're full of crap, or you're crazy, or you're a lunatic, and don't listen to him. And, you know, and I'd tell the patient, well, go tell them to stick their head in the toilet. And, you know, we'd go on. So the second one, this guy shows up and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And I said, they want to talk to me personally. He said, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. I said, well, come on in. Closed the door, sat him down. And I said, well, what do they got to say? And these are the words that came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And it was like, boom, you know, my denial system that was already in tatters, it was already held together with Band-Aids and rubber bands and paper clips. It just collapsed. It just collapsed. And it was like, I went, they are entities. They are separate entities. This is clear. Our way of life, don't interfere with our way of life.
Which is true, by the way. It's true, because everything about our way of life is to advance and sustain life. Everything about darkness that comes to kill, steal, and destroy is to do the exact opposite. So he's right. We are interfering with their way of life. So it's true.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
It was.
It is true. It's just which life will occupy this space.
Well, believe it or not, there is no space where they're at. So they can occupy your body. They can be in there. They can be putting these thoughts in your mind while they're in your body. And then a lot of times when they get strong.
But the soul is a different terrain. And I wanted to discuss that with you. It may be too much for this segment. But yes, the body for sure. But the soul, I think, and the spirit, those are different transactions, right?
Well, you know what I have here that might answer your question? It is a letter from a prisoner who is now locked up in the maximum security block in isolation in the state prison in Colorado. Okay. This guy killed 4 people. He killed kind of 3 gangsters, and he cut his girlfriend into little pieces, and they still haven't found her entire body. He wrote a poem here. Okay. It's kind of gruesome. You want me to read it?
Yes.
Okay. So
what's happening to us and what we're experiencing and the darkness that is upon us that's causing so much confusion, chaos, and dis-ease is gruesome too. And that's why I want you to read it.
So this is what happens when the voices take over. Okay. And you can make your own decision about what's happening to this guy's soul. Okay. So he writes this, and he writes it from prison. He said, there is a monster. It says, there is a monster that lives in my head. This monster is real. It's not under my bed. The monster tells me things to do. Okay, so the voices are telling him things to do. It tells me some. It kind of breaks up because since it's written in pencil. It tells me sometimes when the news is new. My monster is crying as it spent all the years drowning out my courage and disposing all my fears. My monster is strong. That's what I like to think. My monster is coming when it's time to drink. So when he drank, this thing got out of control. My monster is ready. My monster is strong. What will I do when my monster is gone? My monster will never leave. That is its plan. It overwhelms me when I make a stand. So basically what he's saying there is he can't fight against it. There is a monster inside me. I thought I was strong. How could this be? My monster has a name also. He walks in the dark, whispering Yahoo. My monster is watching me. He won't tell you his name. My monster is the shadows you cannot see. His heart is heavy. He plays for the game. My monster is awake. He wants to be monster. He's as blood from a life. His bond is with me, now monster. He has nothing else to do. My monster's aware. And so here he's talking about the thing actually being aware of what he's doing and what's happening around him.
Wow. Jerry, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the strength, the courage, the faith that the pursuit of truth was so valuable that you could not be bought. The cost of what you had to pay, that you were willing to pay the price for what this knowledge and information required of you, because you can't be bought. What's your price? What's your price? You basically didn't have a price because the price became your life, and you can't be bought. When you're willing to pursue truth, no matter what the personal cost to you is, then you can't be bought. And those are the heroes. Those are the people that I look for. Those are the people I hold most respect for, because we're going to come through time and leave time and launch and go back home so fast it'll make our head spin. but there is this frequency to truth. There is a lifeline to truth. And I think it's connected to the heart of God. That's evidenced by the mysteries of design that are irrefutable. They're self-evident. They speak to our natural affection, confirmed by laws of nature, right? They're things we just can't escape. The spirit, the soul, and the body of a person needing to be in alignment, right? For us to be healthy and free. But the promise of rest and the hope of freedom is that when we don't sell out and we pursue truth and we're willing to pay the price with our life, that something beautiful happens and it spreads hope and freedom to all those whose lives we touch. And when I heard about you, when I listened to your lectures, your interviews, I can't wait to read the book. I haven't read it yet, but that you're just spreading light and hope and life.
Well, there is hope. There are other ways of treating schizophrenia than with drugs, because the drugs and the regular psychotherapy only treat the symptoms. They treat the manifestations. They don't get at the cause. There's a couple of things I want to get off my mind before I move into that. Is one, I think what helped me in this is that I didn't trust authority. And number two, that I'm an adrenaline junkie. If I wasn't an adrenaline junkie, I think I might have backed off well before when this happened, because I told you about the guy who came into the office and the voices were telling me, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. Well, I brought that guy in a couple of weeks later, and here we were working, and I brought in a book called The Voice of Knowledge by Miguel Ruiz. And he was talking about the same thing, that these things were entities. They were parasitic entities. So I was always asking these schizophrenics, I was always bombarding them with questions. What happens here? What do the voices do if you do this? What do they do if you read this? How do they react to this? I was getting this information back from them. So I would give them homework, and they'd come back a week later and tell me how it worked. So we were kind of working together to try to find a way. And this guy was doing it. He was getting better. And I bring into him this voice of knowledge that's talking about these voices being parasitic entities, negative parasitic entities. And I said, I'm going to read you a paragraph out of this book. I'd like you to tell me what you think about it. So I started reading, and it got to the point where these things were reporting them to be parasitic entities. And I look up and I said, well, what do you think? And he's just staring at me with this blank stare. He looked like a zombie, just frozen, and I'm looking at him. And then right behind my head, this loud electrical crackling started, it sounded like an arc welder, and it just like, what's that? And then it started moving up the right side of my office, crackling, just crack, 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 crack. And I didn't want to take my eyes off him, because I'm thinking he's going to attack. So I pushed my chair against the wall just in case he does. I'm trying to watch him and kind of trying to track this crackling too. There was no smell to it. There was no light. I couldn't see anything. I could only hear it, and I could hear it move, but there was no other. It didn't trigger any other senses. So it moved across the ceiling, and I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he just stared at me. And then it crackles down the left-hand wall, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can near my leg. I bend over and I look in that trash can. There's nothing there. And then I kind of look up at him, and he stands up slowly, and he goes, I got to leave. And he shuffles down the hall, and I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Leave. Leave. And I didn't call him back. I was so terrified after that. I'm like, what am I getting into? I don't have any cognitive map for this. There is no books written on this. I don't know where this goes. This is a whole new dimension, and it was unsettling.
What did you do?
I shut down my office, and I think I took the day off the next day, just kind of trying to get my head together, because it was blowing my mind. I was going, now I'm hearing hallucinations. Am I going crazy?
No.
And I'm thinking I'm starting to lose it now. So, I was kind of struggling through that. And then it was probably 2 months later, I called this guy back in. My curiosity got the best of me. And he shows up, and he's looking good. I thought he would be a wreck. I thought he'd be an absolute wreck. No, he's looking good. And I said, you're looking good. Huh? How's it going? He says, well, I'm doing what you taught me. I haven't gained any ground, but I haven't lost any either. So he was at a standstill with the voices. He was holding them off. They weren't getting any worse, but he wasn't getting any better. And brought him in, sat down, and I said, after some small talk, I said, did you hear that electrical crackling the last time you were in my office? And he said, yeah, I did. But he said, but I was surprised you did, meaning me. And I said, what in the blazes was that? He said, that was them. I said, them who? The voices? He said, yeah, that was the voices. I said, well, what were they trying to do? He said, they were trying to scare you off. They were trying to make you stop. I said, well, they're trying to scare me. They did a good job. I said, you looked really strange when you left my office. You looked like a zombie. I said, what were the voices telling you when you left my office last time? He said, they were telling me to go get a shank, which is a homemade prison knife, and stick it in your gut. And I'm going, well, I worked with this guy for 6 months. He's a lot better than he was. And I was thinking he would never do anything like that. And I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he looks at me and he goes, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one. That was a little disconcerting.
I've been in a situation like that, unsuspecting, by the way. And I know this is not conventional or mainstream, but we don't diagnose, we don't treat, we don't cure, unlike what you've done for 40 years. I pretty much use science, biometrics, and all kinds of different things to establish a baseline. So we're kind of like a data-driven. From the moment somebody sits in my office the first time, we have data, and it's non-invasive. Some is biofeedback, some is an acoustic mirroring system, but I do have data that begins to give me a framework to share with them to help them see why they're not crazy. So we kind of go do the same thing, but takes a different approach for education purposes, by the way, like what's happening to me.
There is a new psychotherapy out there that wasn't invented by the establishment, by the medical establishment, the psychological establishment, because their regular psychotherapy doesn't work. Their drugs don't work. They don't cure anything. No. This was invented by a ship captain. He drove big freighters across the ocean.
What's his name? His
name was John Mace. So he came up with a therapy called the Mace Energy Method. And I kind of stumbled onto that. You could see spirit working behind the scenes, as thing after thing after thing happened that led me to the chief trainer for Mace Energy. And what this is an energetic psychotherapy. The therapist does not have to know what the problem, what the situation is. So most psychological problems result from some kind of trauma, either psychological, physical, mental, or sexual abuse. You look at schizophrenics, there's always something like that behind the disorder. This new therapy will go in there in an hour. It will remove the cause of that trauma.
Wow.
And it's completely gone. It's no longer in the person's universe. And it will remove the programming that trauma has installed also. It's an energetic therapy. There's not a lot of talking to it.
And where do I find out more about this?
You can go to www.causism.institute. That's CAUSISMINSTITUTE.com. Now, John Mace wrote 2 books, and I've never seen anything work like this. Once I read the books, there was enough in there to kind of basically put it to use.
Okay.
And it's called causism because it gets to the cause of the problem.
Okay. I love that.
So it's energy over mind is one. And I think the second one is just causism.
Okay. But the energy, this is my question to you. The energy has a name. It's sinister. It's nefarious.
Well, what Mace found was, now, these entities are one thing. Mace found that what a trauma causes is something called a negative identity. Okay, and that negative identity is like a computer virus that runs in the background of your mind.
Yeah.
And the effect it has is like, okay, you get traumatized by a certain person. You make a decision about yourself during that trauma. What did I do to cause this? Or I must be an awful person to have to go through this kind of stuff. You make a decision about who you are as a result of this trauma. And you don't make good decisions when you're in a traumatic state. So it's a bad decision. And a lot of times it's, this happened to me, so I'm worthless. So that's running in the background. And what happens is when somebody who is like the person who caused that trauma shows up, there's a negative reaction. So during the trauma, there's a horrible feeling, and there's a lot of confusion and pain. And that stays around for a long time, and it just won't go away. So the ego jumps in and goes, hey, I'll handle this. Let me handle it. And it takes it, and that's where that like time cures all woes. No, it doesn't. So the ego takes it, buries it in the subconscious, and then locks it down. So it's sealed in there, but it's buried alive. So it's still active. It's not dead.
Yeah.
Okay. So anytime somebody who appears in your psychological realm who is similar to the person who caused that trauma, there's a reaction from that thing. And it's usually a fight or flight reaction. You either look at that person and, there's some people, they don't even have to open your mouth and you don't like them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's a get away from that person or fight with them.
Yeah.
And every time somebody like that shows up, it's the same thing. That garbage locked in your subconscious mind is projected outward to the person out there, which causes a lot of turmoil.
So how do they resolve it?
Well, what they found is if you can take that negative identity, okay, find out what it was. So during the trauma, the person made a decision about who they were. That's what they called a negative identity. That's like the computer virus in the back of your mind. Okay. So you outline that negative identity. What does it consist of? And what are its traits? Once you have those traits, you have the negative identity. Okay. That's the virus. That's what it looks like. Okay. Now, the problem John had for a long time was where in the subconscious mind did the ego bury that trauma?
Yeah.
Okay. So what he had to do was turn to the spirit to help him locate that.
Yeah.
Because the spirit knows where it was. So there's a spiritual component to this thing too. So what we have them do is turn that negative identity with all its traits into an image. That image is the location. Okay. And once they turn it into an image, there's a way to dissolve it. And it will gradually diminish and it will return to the individual as positive energy. And this is all energetic. So thoughts are energetic, memories energetic, feelings are energetic, thoughts are energetic.
Yeah, words are. Yeah.
Words are energetic. This therapy is energetic. It gets at the cause of the problem. And here's people I've talked to, they had that, this happened to them when they were 4 or 5 years old or 7 years old. They formed a negative identity as I'm no good, or I'm ugly, or I'm stupid. And then they go on living their life like that based on this virus that was installed during that particular trauma years ago. And you can get rid of it in an hour, and they can feel it leave. They feel like a totally different person. They feel lighter. It doesn't bother them anymore. You ask them to think about the trauma. They go, okay, I went through it, but there's no emotional reaction to it.
So good.
I've never seen anything work like this, ever. And I've been through tons of in-service training, all the way up into the PhD program. There was nothing that can touch it. Now, the mainstream doesn't want this out there because it does work. It's a threat to what they're doing. And they offered this to the university in Australia. So he was an Australian. And the university said, we'll take it, but you got to turn over the patent to us. They went up to the Australian legislature and said, listen, this works. They showed them. They said, you should be using this in the mental health centers. This should be a part of what's taught in the universities. And they blew it off. They don't want anything that works. There's 2 psychologists now that are training under MACE to get their certification. And they're going, where's this been? How come it's not out there? It's not out there because the mainstream doesn't want it out there.
The integrative approach we take to healing and helping people live free is rest, relational, emotional, and spiritual truth. And we have a comprehensive model that involves history, governance, individual self-government, where the portals of consent and compliance open and close, and education, which involves language. Thoughts have power, but words have authority. We prove that, we explain that. Conversation, communion with their own constituents, the spirit, the soul, the body is a consequence of that. That builds communion with others and conversations about these tough things. And that's the model that I use. It's not a mechanism, it's not a tool, but it sounds like, I can't wait to look into this because it sounds like John and you simultaneously, independent of each other, we're doing something similar. I do use technologies and I do use biometrics, but everything is a baseline because I like people to see the growth and how everything's transitioning out of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. And so we have a template and baselines we've developed for that.
Well, that would be interesting because you put a scientific overlay on it and you will see a dramatic difference.
Yes.
After a May session.
Jerry, what an honor that even the hope and the dream of collaborating, because I think that's what it's going to take to heal the hemorrhaging heart of our nation. Thank you for every sacrifice you've made to get to where you're at and speak truth in love with conviction for the good of humanity. And I just thank you so much for that. You are few and far between.
Well, you're more than welcome. I mean, what they're doing is despicable.
Yep, what's happening. And I think there's a lot of people that are caught in the system and they want out. They don't know how. So us collaborating and joining forces, I think is going to be really important. There's a lot of people like you and I that really deeply care. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, we've got 2 MACE therapists. One was a psych nurse who started training in MACE because she ran into the same thing. These drugs aren't doing anybody any good. They're making them worse in the long run. And there was another emergency room nurse who said people aren't getting any better. You know, the psychiatrists and psychologists, they're trapped in that. They're trapped. That's how they make their money. They got to keep this sham going. You know,
and
that they
losing
know
their
something.
Mind. They're trapped in losing their mind, right? They're not well.
They're not well. The suicide rate for psychiatrists is equivalent to that of schizophrenics, which is 3 to 5 times higher than the general population. So these are the people running the Western mental health system.
And with that quote from Jerry Marzinsky, we close this segment. Jerry, thank you for having the courage to just call it what it is, because what you just said is a total truth. Thank you, and thank you.
You're welcome.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about rest, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of rest, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.